Welcome back. My name is Sarah.
And I'm Madalena.
And this is the third in a series of videos on chronic pain management. In our first two videos, we explored mindfulness a little bit and we talked about pain science. And now we're going to look at how we relate to our own pain on a more personal level, exploring the concept of self-compassion.
When we think about how we relate to our own pain and suffering, we want to look at the words we say to ourselves, but also the way in which we say them, and the feelings that might come along with that. Sometimes when we're in pain, we can get down on ourselves. In those moments, it may be helpful and comforting to access a little self-compassion. Self-compassion means extending compassion to yourself in instances of perceived inadequacy, failure, and general suffering. It means treating yourself in the same way that you would treat others who are experiencing difficulty, and it includes practicing kindness and non-judgment in relation to your experience. Like mindfulness, this is a practice that takes work. Kristen Neff, a psychology professor at the University of Texas who has pioneered the research on self-compassion, describes the concept as having three main components. The first is called kindness. This is counter to our common state of self-judgment, and it involves recognizing that things may not always turn out the way we want them to. Instead of fighting this reality, or judging ourselves for not measuring up, Neff explains that being warm and understanding towards ourselves in these moments will bring about greater emotional calmness. There are many different ways to be kind to yourself, including something as simple as taking a bath or offering a few kind words. The second component of self-compassion is common humanity, to counter the feeling of isolation that is often experienced when we are in pain. Sometimes we can feel very alone in our suffering, as if we are the only ones that feel this way, or the only ones that make mistakes. But Neff explains that suffering is a part of the human experience. In a way, it connects us to each other and to our humanity as a whole. Engaging in this component might look like reminding ourselves that there are others out there with similar challenges and that we are not alone. The third component of self-compassion is mindfulness. Seeing clearly the different components of our experience rather than over-identifying with them. Mindfulness, as we've learned in this series, refers to our awareness of present moment experience with a quality of acceptance. At times, especially when we're in pain, our thoughts and feelings can overwhelm our experience of the moment, and we can begin to identify too much with our pain, forgetting that we are more than our pain, or that there's more to life than our pain. Remember that when we practice mindfulness, we're not attempting to suppress our thoughts or feelings, nor are we trying to exaggerate them. We are attempting to create a space to be able to observe them, as they are, with open curiosity. Like the practice we did in video 2, bringing mindfulness to an experience of pain might look like taking the time to notice the sensations, and also to notice any thoughts or feelings we might have about the experience as a whole.
The idea of self-compassion may or may not resonate with you. Similar to our discussion on mindfulness, there are many misconceptions about self-compassion that may prevent us from engaging in the practice. When we hear the phrase self-compassion, we might think of the words selfish or self-indulgent. Self-compassion is in fact the exact opposite. When we are selfish or indulgent, we give in to our every impulse, which may not be beneficial in the long run. But self-compassion means acting in ways that support our overall well-being. Self-compassion can also be confused with self-pity. When we feel self-pity, we become absorbed in our own problems and tend to forget that others struggle too, which can lead to feelings of isolation. Self-compassion, however, emphasizes our common humanity, the idea that suffering is part of the larger human experience and that we're not alone in it. We might also fear that self-compassion equates to weakness. In fact, self-compassion is a powerful inner resource that supports our resilience and ability to cope with challenging situations and experiences. You might also think self-compassion is not an effective way to motivate change. One way we try to motivate ourselves is through self-criticism, or negative internal dialogue about our thoughts, behaviors, and attributes. This motivation comes from a larger fear of failure and ends up undermining our confidence. However, when we are compassionate with ourselves, we're still motivated, but not out of fear. Our motivation instead comes from wanting what is best for ourselves. And lastly, some people believe that self-compassion is just an excuse for bad behavior. But self-compassion actually provides us the safety to look at our behavior with honesty, and take greater responsibility for our own actions without placing blame on ourselves or others. This mindful minute is a little different. Instead of a short mindfulness practice, we'll be talking about a few self-compassion exercises you can try on your own. For one of these exercises, you'll need a pen and paper. Feel free to pause the video now and gather those items.
In this mindful minute, we'll be exploring a few ways to practice self-compassion.
The first exercise is called the compassionate break. And this is an exercise you can do anytime you are feeling a painful sensation or are suffering in any way. And it essentially just involves saying to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. I am having a hard time right now. This is difficult for me. And also noticing that you are not alone in your pain, saying this is part of the human experience. Acknowledging your pain in this way can just help you become more compassionate with yourself.
And another exercise you could try is called supportive touch. So similar to receiving a hug, you are trying to access the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the part of our body that helps us feel calm and safe. And there's a few postures that you could take to achieve this. So if you're comfortable, you could just try placing your hands on that part of you that's feeling unpleasant or feeling pain in the moment. You could place one hand in the other, almost as if you're holding your own hand. Or I really like two hands on the heart, and just holding your hands here, and accessing that part of you, and taking a few deep breaths. And then moving on from there.
And the last compassionate exercise is called How Would You Treat a Friend? And the first step is imagining a friend comes to you and they're in pain or suffering. What are 3 things you might say or do to help comfort them? You can quickly jot these down and notice your tone in the things you say to them. Then the next step would be to think of a moment when you are in pain. It could be right now, it could be a previous moment. What do you say or do for yourself? Notice the tone in which you speak to yourself too here. And notice if there's a difference between how you respond to a friend versus how you respond to yourself. If there is a difference, imagine saying what you would say to a friend to yourself in a moment of suffering. How does that feel? Explore that for a little bit and see if maybe next time you're feeling pain or in a moment of suffering, you can respond to yourself the way you respond to a friend.
If you want to pause the video at this moment and try a couple of these out, you can do that now.
The self-compassion exercises we just introduced in the Mindful Minute are written out here for your reference over the next 3 slides. Please feel free to pause the video now if you'd like to make some notes on these exercises and try them at a later time.
This is not a formal practice, but we did want to give you a chance to check in. In self-compassion, there's a phenomenon called the backdraft. Think about a house that's on fire. When the door of this house is opened, oxygen goes in and flames rush out. Similarly, when we open the door to learning about pain and our relationship to difficulty and suffering, kindness and compassion and love go in while old pain comes out. And if you're experiencing this now or at any time, the most compassionate thing for you to do would be to pull back temporarily. You can take a break from this series at any time. And although it may not seem like it, this will actually reinforce the habit of self-compassion, as you'll be giving yourself what you need in the moment.
Finally, we want to talk a little bit about strengths. The research on resilience shows that tapping into our personal strengths increases our ability to cope with challenges. The fact that you're here now, that you're taking part in this video series, shows that you're resourceful, and that you're curious and open to trying new things. And we're willing to bet that you have a few other strengths that you could tap into as well. Take a moment now to think of one strength that you possess. One example could be patience. Now, think of a situation where your strength really shines through. For example, when you're stuck in traffic, your air conditioning is broken in your car, and it's really hot outside. There's people honking and yelling, and all you want to do is get home to relax. Your strength, patience, would be very useful in this situation, and it's obvious to see why and how. But now think of how you might use your strength in a moment of pain. For example, patience may help you to take a step back, to allow you the time and space to maybe engage in a mindfulness practice, like the stop 1-minute breathing exercise. Coming up with our own strengths is not always easy, and even more difficult than that is thinking about how they might help us in our relationship with pain. This is a list of strengths from the VIA Institute on Character. Some of them, like optimism, courage, and perspective, seem directly related to pain management. Others, like kindness and curiosity, are concepts of mindfulness that are helpful in our non-judgmental approach to our own suffering. And yet some of the strengths on this list seem entirely unrelated to difficulty and pain. Let's look at humor as an example. If you saw humor on the list and thought, that's one of my strengths, maybe you have the ability to make light of challenging situations. Maybe you like to smile and laugh, and you're able to tap into this during a difficult moment. Let's try another one. If you identified with the strength of love, which is actually short for capacity to love and be loved, this could speak to your ability to accept help and support from others, which, as we learned in a previous video, is one of the factors that influences our pain experience. Let's try one more together. What about forgiveness? Remember what we learned about self-compassion. In moments of perceived failure, inadequacy, or general suffering, it's important to be able to forgive ourselves for not doing everything exactly right. For example, say you overextend yourself one afternoon and your chronic pain is worse in the evening as a result. You may be hard on yourself for the decision you made to push through. Forgiveness is a particularly useful strength in pain management. For example, you might say to yourself, I was doing what I thought was best at the time, and I forgive myself. That way you don't add any further mental suffering or self-judgment onto the experience of pain.
This video is all about exploring the different ways in which we relate to our pain, learning more about how we treat ourselves in moments of difficulty, and how we might cultivate a little more self-compassion in our daily lives. In the next video, we'll introduce some pain management strategies from a movement perspective, and we'll also try out some gentle movement in our mindful minute.